Hello, beautiful people, and welcome. Hi to the Emilie Ask Zajef. Emilie is kind of a weird character. Honestly, Emilie getting a rerun is likely to be the main reason why we got Lava Dragon in Abyss. Or sorry, in Stygian Onslaught. But before we can talk about Emilie's overall power, unfortunately, we're gonna have to talk about Stygian Onslaught as a game mode. Because honestly, it has a pretty major impact on Emilie's presence in the meta. So, this patch, they added a new endgame mode called Stygian Onslaught, and in this mode, we have 3 bosses, 2 minutes on each, with DPS requirements that are higher than floor 12 of Abyss for the highest, difficulty that gives you rewards. Alright, so I'm talking about Fearless, difficulty 5. Just looking at the DPS requirements, if we go take a look here, the Hydro Tulpa has 7.6 million HP. You have 2 minutes, which means that your DPS requirements is at around 64k. You start without energy. For most teams, it's going to take you at least 5 seconds to get the energy you need on your supports. And most teams generally end up with needing about 10 seconds, or throwing the first rotation without one of the supports bursts, which makes you lose a bit of DPS in your first rotation. But effectively, I think it's pretty reasonable to assume that you shouldn't expect a team with 64k DPS to be able to clear. And I think assuming about 10 seconds of building bursts at the start is pretty reasonable. So your actual DPS requirement here is around 70k or higher. That's assuming everything goes perfectly. In practice, it does not. Generally, when it comes to Abyss, I've talked about how when your DPS requirement is 50k, most people will struggle heavily to clear unless their team has at least 80k DPS. I think that's a pretty reasonable expectation here as well. Maybe the gap is a little bit smaller because you're only against one boss, but a lot of these bosses also have additional mechanics that will make you lose time. So a 70k DPS requirement for hard requirement generally translates to something like 90 to 100k actual DPS requirement. We can compare that to Abyss. Let's say what we have here. Here, you have 3 minutes for both things, but another way we can look at it is that you've got 2 sides that each have about 90 seconds. Here, this one loses maybe 10 seconds to the shield, and this one loses about 10 seconds to the phase as well. So maybe 80 seconds each. Even if you lose 15 seconds instead, right? You can see the DPS requirements for Abyss are lower. And then on top of that, in Abyss, if one of your teams is stronger, the leftover time from that minute 30 can be used up on the next chamber. In Stygian Onslaught, that's not the case. So not only is the DPS requirement higher, but your time isn't shared between your teams, so one team doing well doesn't help your other teams do better. You don't have Abyss cards that also give you buffs. You don't have Abyss ley lines that can give you buffs, at least to some characters. And you need 3 full teams that don't share any gear or characters. Basically, just in terms of DPS requirements, Stygian Onslaught is noticeably harder than Abyss 12. That means that if you focus your account on attempting to be able to do Stygian Onslaught, you'll be able to do Abyss without too much of a problem. Because of that, I now consider Stygian Onslaught difficulty 5 to be the main endgame mode that accounts are getting built towards. But as you may have noticed, if you've played this Stygian Onslaught at all, the bosses have some unique mechanics that they don't have in Abyss or Overworld that can potentially make them more difficult to do. The Cryo Automaton doesn't have a really different mechanic, but its Cryo Bar is harder to keep down, so you need more Cryo. The Tulpa spawns some mini Tulpas that need to be killed, absolutely, otherwise it heals a lot. And then the Lava Dragon has pretty high resistances until you fill up the Pyro Bar, and filling up the Pyro Bar is even harder than it is in Abyss and Overworld. Basically, if you don't have teams that are well tailored towards each boss, it's going to be a lot more difficult. Against the Secret Source Automaton, right now the best team for Cryo Automaton is, without much competition, a Skirk team. If you do a Skirk team with Escoffier, Farina, and +1, right, whether it's Shenhe, Mualani, Dahlia, Kate, it doesn't matter who the last one is, right? You do a team like this, on my account, I'm able to clear in less than 70 seconds. My strongest team that is not a Cryo carry can just barely clear this in 120. And I have pretty high investment in terms of artifact investments and pretty solid builds. Obviously, I don't have constellations or signature weapons, but still, it's just barely able to clear if I'm not using optimal units. And unfortunately, that's just kind of the reality of Stygian Onslaught. It's going to encourage specific characters, and if you don't have them, things will be much more difficult. And because of that, a character just being overall good isn't really that big of a deal anymore. No matter how good Verissa is, she's not clearing this shit in time on my account. And so if the bosses in the current version of Stygian Onslaught are bosses that don't favor Verissa teams, it's very possible that my Verissa is just going to be sitting on the bench. The reason why this is important is because previously, I used to say that supports are a lot more important than carries, because you only need 2 teams, and getting more supports helps you be ready for more different scenarios, and supports will stay on your account for longer, so when a new carry comes out, that's much better. If you already have the good supports for them, you can go for them and have a team that is a major upgrade over what you currently have. Now, it's starting to come into question whether that's the case anymore. While good supports are good, obviously, and supports in general have or provide a certain upside through allowing more variety, if you don't have the carries that are good against the specific bosses that are in the current Stygian Onslaught, you might end up in a situation where even if you have good teams and good builds, your account is just incapable of clearing difficulty 5. That's actually the case for a lot of people that skipped Escoffier and Skirk. While it's technically possible to clear the Secret Source Automaton without them, there's even a 4-star only clear out there with Kea, Chongyun, Rosaria, and Eon Sun. That shit is hard, and it needs like perfect builds. So there's a lot of very good accounts that have very good builds that are just currently not able to clear the current Onslaught. And so if what you care about is having an account that is able to keep clearing Onslaught long term, the main thing that you want to be looking for on 5-star characters is either characters that are much better than their alternatives in their respective archetypes, or characters that will fit in multiple different archetypes and be able to effectively be good against multiple different Stygian Onslaught bosses. So where exactly does Emilie fit in there? Well, unfortunately, she is not a significant upgrade over anyone in any of her teams. That's the unfortunate reality of Emilie's power. While she is oftentimes one of the best options, if not sometimes the best option for her teams, the gap is rarely big. Which means that obtaining Emilie instead of obtaining someone else is honestly pretty unlikely to make that much of a difference in whether or not you're able to clear a Stygian Onslaught boss. That being said, Emilie does have an upside in terms of potentially enabling a pseudo-burning team on characters that don't care that much about burning if you need burning. For example, in the current Stygian Onslaught with a Lava Dragon statue that heavily encourages burning teams. You can use Emilie on a team like an Arlecchino team, for example, and you can end up breaking the Lava Dragon's bar more quickly. The biggest problem with that is that while these teams will break the bar more quickly, you don't need to. These teams generally don't struggle to break the bar fast enough, even without Emilie, to still clear the boss. And so while Emilie may be even part of the best Arlecchino team you can make, depending on what you have on your account against a Lava Dragon statue, she's also very far from necessary. The difference in clear time between using Emilie here and using a character like Kazuha, even just Sucrose, won't be that big. You'll get your clear, or you'll get the down a little bit faster, but these teams can already get 2 downs even without Emilie. Emilie doesn't allow for a 3rd down, and the damage during the down is going to be a little bit lower with Emilie. All in all, this isn't to say that Emilie is a bad character, but when it comes to the long-term power of your account, because Emilie doesn't do that much for any of the teams, and because the teams that Emilie helps turn into burning teams for stuff like Lava Dragon generally have alternatives to her, right? These teams can bring one more Pyro unit over Shredder. If you look at Electro carries, right? If you're doing something like this, Emilie's usable here, but you can also just use Shovelers because Channeling Zap is good enough that you'll still be able to get 2 downs. It just makes it a little bit more unnecessary. Because of that, I'd say that Emilie is one of the characters that has just the least amount of pull value, especially with the release of Stygian Onslaught, because honestly, she's just not important to her teams. The main teams where Emilie sees play in the current Stygian Onslaught is obviously with Knight teams. But just like many of the other teams, in Knight teams, Emilie isn't necessary. Emilie will get you your first down a little bit more quickly, but you can still reliably get 2 downs on Knight teams that don't use her. And other characters, like Yansan, for example, just still work fairly well here. The main upside that Emilie provides is that her giving you burning uptime without having to swap to Knight helps you get your down a little bit more quickly, which makes you less reliant on using a fast pyro like Shangling, and which lets you get away with using something like either Maoika or a throwaway 4-star that allows you to use Maoika and Shangling on this side, for example. Right, like you can use something like Eonson Amber here, and that allows you to still be able to do your whatever strong team you want to use for the Tulpa. And Emilie does have some value in that sense of allowing you a little bit more flexibility. But unless the boss is the burning boss, she probably won't see much play. All of this to say, power level aside, Emilie's just not that valuable of a character. There's a few other bosses that can favor Emilie, mainly the Tulpa can. We know that Tulpa is coming next patch in Stygian Onslaught, and the boss description for Tulpa in the next patch makes it seem like Emilie won't be as good because the shield is much bigger, but you have more time to break it. But then when you finish breaking the shield, the Tulpa loses HP based on the Night Soul damage you dealt. But Emilie doesn't do Night Soul damage, and burning is not Night Soul damage. So depending on how exactly that works, it's very possible that breaking it a little bit faster with Emilie isn't actually better. But yeah, so Emilie will help you break the shield a little bit faster, but will that actually lead to a faster clear? Not entirely sure yet. I haven't actually talked much about her actual power level, so let me just quickly mention that. In terms of power level, Emilie is a very balanced character, which in Natlan meta, which has seen power creep, an unbalanced character is not a word you're happy hearing if you are thinking of getting Emilie to make your account stronger. The amount of damage that Emilie provides to a team isn't insignificant, but damage is the only thing that Emilie provides. She also technically makes it so that your self-burning damage is lower, but that is rarely relevant. So the main thing she's providing is damage. And just in terms of the amount of damage she's providing, the unfortunate reality is that she does similar damage to other characters that provide damage and other things. Her output is similar to Escoffier, but Escoffier is also buffing the out of the rest of your team and giving you a healer for Farina. If we go back to the leakers for next patch, right, you compare her damage to Inefa's damage, and Inefa's damage is noticeably higher, on top of also providing you with a shield. The main upside that she has is that fulfilling her requirement is a little bit easier, because Bennett is so broken that any team that can use Bennett wants to use Bennett, which already makes it much easier to get your burning requirement for Emilie. Whereas when you look at Inefa teams, Hydro units don't synergize that well with Inefa, so it's a bit harder to fulfill her Hydro requirement without having some anti-synergy in the team. If you look at Escoffier, obviously she makes it so you're not even allowed to use Bennett. So right now, she still has that going for her at the very least. But with more characters getting released in the future, it's pretty likely that there's going to be some characters that just perform better than she does in the teams that have more strict requirements, but where you can fill those requirements easily. We might have a Mono Pyro support that will just be significantly better than Emilie in the Arlecchino team I mentioned earlier, for example. Anyways, that's it for the overall place in the meta. Emilie's not a bad character, but she's held back by how balanced she is, which in a meta that sees a lot of unbalanced characters just doesn't do enough. So now, let's move on to questions from chat. Is she still cooked for weapon options? I remember it was Sig or Bust when she released. I mean, it's not that she's cooked on weapon options, it's that her signature is insane, which makes the gap between having Sig and not having Sig pretty big. I will say though, they have released a lot of broken Sigs lately, where the gap between having them and not having them is close to Emilie. She's still among the highest ones for difference between Sig and alternatives, but she's not standing there alone anymore. Let's just put it that way. Can you run Burn Vape Mualani with Emilie? Yes, you can. The biggest issue with Burn Vape Mualani is that it's going to be hard to get a Hydro Aura, so most of the time you have to give up on getting Cinder City with Chilonen or getting VV on an animal character, which can be a little bit annoying, but the teams also tend to be a lot more mechanically easy to play if you don't try to get a Hydro Crystallize or Hydro Swirl through your burning. So they do have some upsides. I will say, there are two main things that Mualani does much better than other carries. And like I've mentioned in the very long intro to this video, with bosses being tailored towards specific carries, that's the sort of stuff you're looking for in carries. So what is it that can make Mualani better than other carries versus specific bosses? So one, she's a forward vape carry. So if there's some form of incentive for forward vape, she will like that. And two, she's a carry that hits very slowly. So if there's an incentive for hitting slowly, she's gonna like that. That's actually the case for the next Stygian Onslaught with the turtle. The Lova Legend turtle punishes you really hard for hitting it often. And so the optimal characters to use for the turtle are going to be characters that hit slowly, like Mualani. The biggest problem with using Emilie in a Mualani team is that Emilie hits quickly. So that completely destroys that upside against the turtle. You can't use Emilie Mualani against the turtle because Emilie by herself fills up the turtle's bar and makes it shield up instantly. And so going for Emilie in order to make your Mualani team better, for me, is a pretty bad idea. Generally, when Emilie is good with a Mualani team, she's not the only option. And there's also a lot of times when Mualani's strengths get countered by Emilie being on the team. Does Emilie make air fryer more fun? Yes, 100%. But Stygian Onslaught is not air fryer friendly, so it doesn't matter. How much better is Emilie Reverie and Mawika Deepwood versus Emilie Deepwood and Mawika Codex? It's less than a 5% difference generally. It's really, really close. I'll say specifically against a Lava Dragon because it kind of just ignores half of your Mawika bursts because it has really high power resistance. You'd probably rather go Deepwood Mawika over Deepwood Emilie, but it's not even going to be that big of a difference. More importantly, getting a good Reverie set, unless you're also going for a good Bond of Life set, is kind of just not worth it. The only teams where getting a good Reverie set on Emilie is a major upgrade over Deepwood are teams where someone else can hold Deepwood without losing damage, which are honestly very few and far between. There are teams where it's a minor upgrade. There are barely any teams where it's a major one. Yeah, it's pretty much just when you're using Daya that it's a major upgrade. Daya or Toma in a Kenichi team, I suppose. If I already have Emilie C0 or 0, would it be better to try to pull for her Sig and risk pulling Mawika's or her C1? The reality is that it kind of depends. Emilie's Sig is kind of hard to properly quantify because Emilie's Burst is weird. Emilie's Burst is an ability that is worth using, but isn't so good that you actively want to build ER for it. Unless your current build is only missing like 10% ER to burst every rotation, at which point it is worth sacrificing a little bit of damage for 10% ER. But if you're missing like 30-40% ER, the damage you'll have to sacrifice is probably just too high. What that means is that because her weapon gives her energy and basically trivializes her ER requirements, depending on what the rest of your artifacts look like, the upgrade you get from her weapon can range a lot. It can vary a lot. So, for example, if you look at my Deepwood build, my best Deepwood circlet is this one, even without looking at the ER. My other options, pretty shit. So I have 10% ER for quote-unquote free. My best Sands, same thing, another 10% for quote-unquote free. My best Feather, same thing, this one's 11.7% for quote-unquote free. And I'm off base on the flower, and the reality is that my artifact quality for flowers that have ER is much higher than my artifact quality for flowers that don't. And so if I were to use something other than this, something that doesn't have ER, it would not be a major upgrade to my damage. That means I'm in a situation where I have 147 ER on Emilie without going out of my way to really get any. In a lot of teams, this is enough ER to burst every rotation, and so getting Emilie's signature would honestly just not do nearly as much for me as it does for people that don't have a bunch of throwaway ER on their builds. But that's incredibly build specific. If I cared about Emilie a lot and I got her signature, I'd go back to farming either Reverie or Deepwood until I got artifacts that don't have as much ER and have more attack and more crit, but I don't. So even if I got her signature, it wouldn't be as much of an upgrade for me as it is for a lot of other players that don't have this amount of ER for quote-unquote free. But what that means is that for me, if I wanted to upgrade my Emilie, it would likely be a lot better to get her C1 than it would be to get her Sig. But for you, it's probably just gonna depend. If you're not in the same situation as me where you have a lot of ER just for free, it's probably just a question of the banner quality overall. If you're someone who doesn't have Yansan C6, it probably makes the decision lean a little bit more in favor of the character banner. If you're someone who either has Mawika without her Sig, or you play Kenichi and you don't have Kenichi's Sig, right? You're using Kenichi on like Serpent Spine or something, that would make things lean more towards the weapon banner. Would you pull for her again if you knew the Natlan lineup? Honestly, no. The main reason why I pulled her is because I expected there to be characters that relied on burning archetypes afterwards, and I expected Emilie to be important to that archetype. But with the way they've gone about it, she kind of just isn't important to the archetype. On top of that, I didn't expect that I would want to go for every Natlan 5-star, but it turned out that I did. So my primos saved up went from 100k to 50k from Natlan. So if I could go back in time, I would definitely skip Emilie. What sort of character do you think could take advantage of Emilie's kit and Nodcry? So I mentioned that earlier, but if they end up making a pyro character that has a changed burning reaction, like they release a new character, they give him a solar burning reaction. It's a pyro carry. You want to use Bennett, you want to use Kazuha. The best last slot is very likely to be Emilie. But again, if they do make something like that, it's very likely they're also going to make an Emilie rerun. How good is Emilie in teams where you want Nahida but don't have Nahida? Well, it depends on what teams. If you're trying to play Hyperbloom, she's dog shit. If you're trying to play Mualani, she's alright. How good is Emilie's weapon for Arlecchino? It's not very good. The trigger required for Luminous Elegy is really difficult to fulfill on a Pyro character. Triggering burning is not actually something that Pyro characters can do unless you run out of Dendro and run out of Pyro, or you react away the Pyro. Basically, you'll trigger it maybe once at the very start, and that's it. Emilie doesn't care because she's Dendro, so she can re-trigger burning, and she can obviously deal Dendro damage to burning opponents. But with Arlecchino, right, you trigger this maybe once if you go to your Dendro character before you use Arlecchino's skill, and that's it. Then you never trigger it again. And so all this is a crit rate, 5-star stat stick with 15% attack, which isn't awful, but it's also not good. Who are the Emilie alternatives in a Knight team / burning team with Pyro carries? Side grade alternatives for Knight teams, assuming you go from the default Knight team, which is with Mawika. All right, side grade alternatives to Emilie here is pretty much only Yonsan. Your other alternatives generally tend to be minor downgrades, but even minor downgrades don't tend to be that much worse, right? You can use Auron. If you're not against a Lava Dragon, you can use characters like Escoffier too. You can just use any random Deepwood holder and put the Seed Lolly in the bag. Yeah, I mean, you can use Seed Lolly, but don't. You can also obviously use Farina, yeah. Although I'm not a huge fan of Farina with Mawika here. I prefer Farina Shining Lang over Farina Mawika. How good is Overburn with Emilie? It's okay. The biggest problem with Overburn is that if you have fast Pyro, you won't have good Quicken uptime, right? In order to trigger Quicken, you need to remove the Pyro and then apply Electro before you reapply Pyro. So if you have fast Pyro, it's going to be hard to maintain that Quicken, and you're just going to end up losing it pretty quickly. But if you have slow Pyro, you're not going to get a lot of overload, so there's not going to be much of an upside to using a Pyro character instead of a buffer like Shilonen. It works. It's one of your options. Is it ever worth putting Emilie on a supportive set like TOM or Noblesse rather than a more damage-focused set? Yes and no. The reality is that if a support set is good, you generally want to use Deepwood. And if there's someone else that can use Deepwood, they can also either use Noblesse or TOM. So rather than giving Emilie Noblesse and that other character Deepwood, you'll give that other character Noblesse and Emilie Deepwood, because Emilie benefits from the 15 Dendro damage %. So there's very little, if any, situations where Emilie actually will want to use TOM or Noblesse. That does it for the Emilie Asks Zajef. Emilie is a character who is, in my opinion, honestly pretty well designed balance-wise, but Natlin kind of ruined that. I'm not a fan of the trend of power creep. I think that characters designed at around Emilie's power level that are strong in specific scenarios, but not necessary to any teams, I think tend to be pretty healthy for the meta. But healthy for the meta and valuable to get are two different things. And unfortunately, Emilie doesn't really reach that threshold for me to consider her valuable to get. That being said, she is at the very least good enough that if she's your favorite character and you just think she's really cool, you'll be able to use her and make her work pretty well. As usual, I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned a thing or two, and I will see you guys in the next one. Bye, YouTube.